it doesn't really box you. It just shows you some patterns. And the more aware you are of those patterns, the more likely it is you will be able to have empathy towards yourself and understanding and love, because it's
I
very
love that.
important to have that relationship with yourself. It's kind of like knowing what your love language is or your attachment style. It's some information about yourself that you can make great use of. You don't have to be a fanatic, as I said, but you can definitely draw some really relevant things from that place.
So let's talk about each letter and what
Mhm.
each letter means, and then we can get into the temperaments of each group.
Sure. Okay, so a basic overview of the letters. We've got E or I, extrovert or introvert. And contrary to what it means in our society, because it's a bit different, cognitive extroversion or extroversion means that you're more likely to identify yourself with the object, with the outside. So it could be people, it could be situations, it could be concrete objects, but you're more likely to project your mental energy onto that. Whereas introversion means you're more likely to separate yourself from the outside, from the environment, and focus your attention on what's going on inside of you rather than outside of you.
Mm.
So it's more of a preference about where your energy flows. Of course, we find correlations that a lot of the times extroverts are indeed more talkative and outgoing, but it's not always the case. And that's important to understand when talking about this.
Right.
Um,
Oh, question.
then we've got.
Sorry.
Mhm.
Does it have anything to do with how you recharge, being extrovert or introvert?
Yes, to some extent, extroverts are more likely to draw energy from the outside world, interacting with people, doing new things, getting out there and experiencing something. Whereas introverts are more likely to get energy from their inner world. So that could mean spending time alone or just kind of withdrawing, even when they're with other people, but withdrawing into themselves to kind of like recharge. Yeah, that's also a facet of this.
Right.
Okay, then we've got N or S. N stands for intuition and S for sensing. So, as I said at the beginning, intuition is more about focusing on the abstract, focusing on ideas and concepts and dealing with those things over dealing with concrete practical things or realistic things. Whereas sensing is more about reacting to the environment, dealing with facts, dealing with concrete information, with practical things, being more realistic, more down to earth.
Right.
Then we've got thinking and feeling, so T or F. Thinking means that when you're making decisions as a thinker, you're more likely to prioritize objective things, logical things. Whereas feeling means that when you make decisions, you're more likely to prioritize subjective things like feelings and values and social aspects and so on. And then we've got J or P, judging or perceiving. Judging means that you're more likely to function well in a structured environment, in a more organized environment with a clear deadline, a clear structure. And you're more likely to prefer deciding before just observing, whereas perceiving means that you function better in a more flexible, perhaps even spontaneous environment. But this is just a general definition. Things can be more detailed than that if we look at
it's like
specific
you can be a
types.
J and you can still show spontaneity. You can still
Of
like,
course.
do things, go with the
Yeah.
flow. But
Yeah.
most of the time you would prefer to have an organized, detailed plan rather than just like, going with the flow.
Yeah, and a misconception a lot of people have in the MBTI community online is that being a perceiver means that you're disorganized.
And
Well,
lazy.
no. And lazy, exactly. But that's not true, because I know so many perceivers who are actually very organized because they train the skill in themselves. They train to be disciplined.
Yeah, and this is why I just think it's so important to take this test and learn about your personality type, because when you learn that, you naturally tend to be a little bit more unorganized than, let's say, someone who is a high J. Then you kind of keep an eye on that. You kind of see where like your weakness comes from, and you're like, oh, I'm going to wake up and create a list of tasks that I have to get done today, because I know if I don't, I just get distracted and busy with my day and forget where the time went. And then it's evening and you're like, oh, I didn't do any of the stuff that I had to do, So it's like in that way, you can help yourself evolve when you know your weaknesses and you have an eye on them.
Exactly.
But something that kind of like rubs people the wrong way when it comes to these personality type tests is that and this is a big criticism of Myers-Briggs test, is that people say, well, I don't want to take the test because I don't want to know what my type is. because that puts me in a box. That dictates to me what things I'm not good at and what things I'm naturally just, not developed in. And that restricts me to express myself freely. And I don't like that. Have you ever had that criticism? Have you ever heard someone say something like that?
Yes, a lot of times,
Yeah.
especially in real life. And what I said was, well, it doesn't really box you. It just shows you some patterns. And the more aware you are of those patterns, the more likely it is you will be able to have empathy towards yourself and understanding and love, because it's very important to have that relationship with yourself. It's kind of like knowing what your love language is or your attachment style. It's some information about yourself that you can make great use of. You don't have to be a fanatic, as I said, but you can definitely draw some really relevant things from that place.
Yeah, I love how you said you can have more empathy for yourself, because it's like a lot of times you have that pattern, again, as you mentioned, you have that pattern in your behavior where you constantly behave a certain way. And let's say after you do it, I don't know, do something that you don't per se like and you wish you could be the other way, and you get angry at yourself because you're like, well, how come you didn't fix it when it happened the other 90 times or the other whatever amount of times? Instead of getting mad at yourself, you can kind of understand that, like, oh wait, this is kind of like my blueprint. This is how I naturally tend to be. Of course, you can always develop yourself more and enhance yourself and do better.
Exactly.
But that's how you naturally are. And it's not just to define people as a type, but to just define a framework of holistic self-development, like a self-reference system for just like a really good frame for you to start developing yourself. It's like, wouldn't you? Go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say that because I said about empathy towards yourself, it also gives you empathy towards others, because you realize that they're not acting like this to make me mad. They're acting like this because they think a bit differently.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Like, I've had so many friends that I always thought to myself, if I didn't know about this whole personality type, I would stop being friends with them, because because instead of taking things personally, you start understanding that, like, no, it's not. It has nothing to do with them. It's like, this is just how this person functions.
Exactly.
Move with the rhythm, shake it up, stop when the clock hits 13. You've been working, but you're flirting.